issues that our nation is facing, and indeed the Western world is facing, if we're trying to sort our way out of a particular problem that has implications in politics, it has implications in terms of nationhood, it has implications in terms of your personal practical worldview, and ultimately it's going to have implications as to the choices you make in life. Yeah. The implications of this question are rather profound. Most of us, however, haven't really thought about it very deeply. It is something that really maybe politicians, philosophers, and historians bat back and forth. But it's a relatively simple question. And the Bible gives us some real insight. If we don't remain rooted in Scripture, we may very well end up with the wrong answer to a relatively simple question. And we get the wrong answer, it has profound implications for everyone that moves in that direction. Now here's the question. What is a nation? That's the question. What is a nation? Now, as a beginning point, most of us would understand, okay, well, you might say a nation is a chunk of land that has people living in it. Well, so far so good. Agreed. Nations, historically and practically speaking, are going to have some sort of a territorial boundary, right? So here is a territorial boundary, and in this territorial chunk of land, this geography, you have a lot of people living in it. Now, you don't have to know a lot about history to understand that within a given piece of land called a nation, some nations are stable, and happy, and prosperous. And some are just fraught with all kinds of trouble, are they not? Amen. Internal strife continuously. One big uproar after another. We also know that a nation here may one day say, gee, I'd like to add and make our nation bigger. So we'll just kind of take over some of our neighbors' territory. And they're going to come up with a reason by which they would justify that. And there's lots of different ways that they do that. Meanwhile, this nation over here may say, well, that's a terrible idea, and then we have a great war. Or perhaps they might even say, well, we'll make a deal, we'll give you a little piece of our nation, but we want to keep most of it. On what grounds might they answer these questions and make these decisions? And of course, you have all kinds of in the vicissitudes of time, you have empires and history's full of this stuff, right? It just goes on, and those of us who like reading about it find interesting. The rest of you find it totally dull because it just is going on, going seemingly nowhere for any good reason. But it is a question that's before us right now. Not a new question. What is a nation? And those of us that live in the United States of America are really wrestling this, whether we've really thought about it or not. What is our nation? The United States of America. So we have a territory. What makes someone living in this territory an American? Is it the fact that you're present there? If you're physically present in the boundaries, does that make you an American? Or not? Or if you say, well, it depends how long you've been there. Maybe it depends on how long your parents have been there, or your grandparents, so then this takes us into other related questions. We've got to define certain ideas that come up, and we may use the word as citizens. So we'll have citizens of a nation versus residents versus legal aliens and illegal aliens, and so we got to sort all this out, right? So this actually, even though it seems like a simple question, it does have a lot of profound implications, and you can probably see that this is a problem in our time, isn't it? So let's just look at this a little closer. The word nation itself actually gives a clue as to what at least one alternative for what a nation is. The word nation comes from the Latin word natal, N-A-T-A-L, as in nativity. Natal, it's a word that means birth. So a lot of people say, oh, well, okay, that tells us what a nation is. If you're born in this chunk of ground, that makes you an whatever. That makes you an American, or it makes you a Chinaman, or whatever nation you're talking about. Maybe. important question, right? Now, essentially, this not being a new question, philosophers, historians, politicians, great thinkers of different sorts have struggled with this pretty difficult question. And essentially it boils down into really two alternatives. There's really two choices about how you're going to define what a nation is. And the real key is, what is it that, if you say, okay, well, here's our nation, and you got a group of people living in it, it seems that there ought to be something that this group of people have in common. Amen. That makes them a member of the nation. And if they have something in common that makes them the member of a nation, and then they are part of that nation. And if they don't have that factor in common with everybody else, then they're not a part of that nation. Amen. Well, okay, well, that helps a little bit. So that means everybody that's in this territory has to have something in common. And that makes them an American, or a Canadian, or a whatever. So, what is that thing that they have in common? Well, there's really two alternatives. One alternative, which I'm going to present to you first, which I think is very biblical, and which is really God's plan, and God's concept of what a nation is, and is one that is pretty common throughout history, and in many respects, history keeps on defaulting to this, simply because it really does seem to work a lot better than the alternative. But the first choice is that the thing that they all have in common is that they're all related to each other. They're related to each other. A relatively simple concept, but it essentially works like this. I'm a Benson, and I have my Benson family, and then there's an extended family, of which I have cousins and second cousins, or maybe a granduncle, or a not-so-granduncle, or whatever he is. So I have an extended family. A nation, under this concept, is simply a large extended family. It just gets pretty big, a pretty big extended family. So we have like a family, and an extended family, and a tribe, and then a nation. And this, if you're a member of that nation, that means you, more or less, probably, we could say you're going to have a common ancestor, a common progenitor. You're going to look back and say, and maybe you kind of lost track who that is, but you kind of sense that there is a common ancestry. Yes. There is a common kinship. You are genetically connected. Right? That is the idea of kinship, a genetically connected concept. That's what a nation is. Now that really, as you're going to see, is really a pretty biblical idea, in my view. Then you have the other idea for a nation. And today, one of the words that's used to describe this other alternative, they usually use the phrase now, at least this is the trendy one, this is the one they use. They call it a propositional nation. A propositional nation. That means they are bound together by a given proposition. Well, let's get an easier word, an idea. They all hold to a similar idea. There's something, what holds them in common is they all have a similar worldview, a similar set of values, a similar idea, a similar concept. And this guiding concept, this guiding values, this guiding proposition, this guiding set of ideas, usually fairly simple ideas, but these guiding ideas, this guiding worldview, we all agree that this is the way we all ought to live. And since we all ought to live this way, that makes us a nation. In contrast to other people over there, they've got some other idea. They live by some other proposition, some other set of ideas, and some other set of values. So we have our nation, and we have that nation over there. And they have a different set of values. I suppose an ideal and perfect nation is when you have both of them working in the same direction. Amen. You got an extended family, which is lovely genetic kinship, but everybody pretty much agrees about how to think as well. Isn't that great? Amen. And they're all firing intellectually in the same wavelength, the same values, the same proposition. Of course, life being what it is, it doesn't work out that tight, does it? All right. So what is the idea that's going to bind people together in the borders of the country? Is it kinship, or is it an idea? Is it a nation based on kinship, or a nation that is propositional? All right. Now, you may have already guessed why this is an important question for you and I in our time in history, right now in the year 2017 and the cusp of 2018, why this is an important question for us to get the right answer for you as a person living here in Missouri, the United States of America, why maybe this might be useful. A lot of you probably can see why having a good answer here may be helpful to you. But if you can't, just bear with me. And before we go any further, let's go into the Scripture and let's look at the Bible. The Bible's going to give us some real clues as to how God helps us answer this question. We're going to start in Genesis chapter 10. And we'll probably cover quite a few verses, quite a few passages. And you may have a little trouble keeping up with me, but just do the best you can. Now, we all understand that before the fall of Adam and Eve, God had a great plan. Adam and Eve were going to be the progenitors of all kinds of folks. And everything was they're going to eventually multiply. There'd be oodles and oodles of people all over the world, and everybody get along great because everybody was obedient and followed God's plan perfectly. Well, that didn't last long at all. So Adam and Eve messed up in the Garden of Eden, so you've got a world that is screwed up pretty close to the very beginning. A fallen world. So, does God give any guidance, though? Well, fortunately, of course, He does. We have God's laws and commandments that are designed to help us figure out how to live in a pretty much screwed up world. So our lives are a little less scrambled. That's good. Well, God gives us some clues. Beginning near the book of Genesis, in Genesis chapter 10, He gives us some clues as to His idea of how man ought to live now that they're multiplying out and can't get along very well and full of selfishness and all kinds of sinful natures, and there's going to be trouble one way or another. To give a little guidance out of this muddled chaos, what is God's concept for a nation? Well, Genesis chapter 10 begins to tell the story. Now, we're not going to read this chapter. For many people read this chapter and they think, my goodness, this is dry as dust. Extremely dull. Now, let me just give you a sense of what it is. We have, in verse 1, we have Noah and his 3 sons introduced to us, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And then we have the chapter divided into 3 big chunks. We have all of the sons of Japheth and their families. That's in verse 2. Then starting in verse 6, we have all the sons of Ham described. And then down in verse number 21, we get to the sons of Shem. Now this chapter has a nickname. It is called the Table of Nations. Now why is it called the Table of Nations? Well, because of all the rest of the Old Testament, and even spilling into the New Testament some, all of these people who are listed in that, all these sons of Ham or sons of Japheth or whoever it is, those names keep popping up again and again and again and again. Yeah. And it turns out of the various sons of Ham that are listed and grandsons of Ham that are listed, each one of them becomes the father of a nation. And then you have the sons of Japheth, and each of those sons of Japheth becomes the father of a nation. And the same with the sons of Shem. Now, these turn out to be kind of important fellows then. They represent a whole family tree and a whole extended giant family. And so scholars, to try to keep track of the mixed up stories that we see in the New Testament and the Old Testament and all this stuff, they come back to this chapter and they say, this is the roadmap about who's who. And essentially, you've got good guys and bad guys and in-between guys. You got the sons of Shem, who are basically the good guys. And there's a whole batch of nations that come from the sons of Shem. And then you got the bad guys. These are the sons of Ham. Some are badder than others. The baddest of all is the Canaan. Those guys actually have a curse. Yeah. But you got the other sons of Ham that don't carry a curse, but they just kind of turn out to be ne'er-do-wells. Yeah. And then you got the sons of Japheth who are just kind of out there. Sometimes they're teaming up with the good guys, and sometimes they're teaming up with the bad guys, and they're the wild card in world history. These nations. Now, what does this have to do with our question that we started with? What is a nation? Well, he gives us a great clue at the very beginning. God's concept of a nation. He says, look, in a screwed up, fallen world, to keep people from fighting as much as they would otherwise, let's spread them out a little bit. Now, that works pretty good with people like, say, the Bensons and, say, the Kuklans. Now, if Steve and I had to share a house and Bonnie and Julie had to share a kitchen, that creates an opportunity for conflict. So Steve and I squabble about how to store the things in the garage, and they can't get along in the kitchen. But if we say, okay, God says, well, let's spread the two families out a little bit. And Steve, you go live over here in one house, and Julie, you and Marie go live over here in one house. Now you can get along together because you only bump into each other on occasion, rather than living on top of each other. So God does the same thing with the nations. Amen. He says, let's take the Hamites and we'll kind of scoot them over this way, and as they get bigger and bigger, we'll separate them out into different nations. Right? And we got the Shemites, and we'll separate them out into different nations so they don't squabble quite as much, and they'll kind of spread out. And so you end up with many nations on the planet Earth, on the earth. And notice all these nations, many nations, have all come from Adam. This is just the Adamic nations. You say, what about these all these? What about all the black people and the Chinese people? They're not even worth our concern right now. And that's another question. It's a real question, but you kind of get the idea. So those would be, I guess you call them other peoples and nations beyond that. So we won't really get into that. But even just within Adam, just within the sons and the extended family of Adam, God separates the nations out. So we begin to see that what makes, say, one of the sons of Ham, a guy named Philistine, he became the father of the Philistines. Well, the Philistines, they lived here. And it was worked out pretty good. The Philistines living here didn't argue too much with the Israelites who lived here as long as they didn't get too close. But when they got bumped up next to each other, what do? Start squabbling and fussing with each other quite a bit. We know all those stories, right, in the Old Testament, how the Philistines and the Israelites fought. Squabbled, argued, and even within the Israelites, we discover as time passes and the earth gets more and more people and things get a little more crowded, even the Israelites ended up in time splitting into two different Israelite nations, right? And that wasn't necessarily a terribly horrible idea. It was kind of better than maybe the alternative. Because when they had a terrible king, Rehoboam, this was sort of kind of God's idea. He actually said, Jeroboam, I'm going to make you a king. And so you can have some of the tribes, and Rehoboam, you keep you, and we'll have two Israelite nations. So this idea that just to get along, we're going to spread out, we're going to have nations, and we really get this sense from Scripture that the definition of a nation means what you have in common is kinship. Kinship. So let's go a little further in this idea. If we go to Deuteronomy chapter number 32, we have an important verse that amplifies what we've been talking about. In Deuteronomy 32, Moses is at the end of his life. He's giving a long speech. And at the end of his life, he has a couple pieces of advice. And beginning in verse number 8, he reminds them of what God has done, and God's concept and plan, and what this has to do with our topic today. Beginning in verse 8, Deuteronomy 32, Moses said, when the Most High divided to the nations their inheritance, when he separated the sons of Adam, he set the bounds of the people according to the number of the children of Israel. So there we see it. God divides out the sons of Adam so they can not squabble and fight quite so much. And then, in verse 9, which really isn't our key topic for today, but it's worth mentioning, in verse 9 he points out that among the different nations on earth, God does seem to have some that he favors more than others. He's not completely impartial. He really does put his hand on the scale. You say, well, that's not fair. You go ahead and complain to him. He created all things. It's look, I can't explain. Fairness is, look, most of you know that life's not fair, so we don't really even go down that road. But God has His own reasons. Fortunately for you and I, we're on the side that He's favoring. That's good news for us. But in verse 9, he comes right out and says it. Jacob, for the Lord's portion is His people. Jacob is the lot of His inheritance. So it's pretty clear that God spreads out the nations, and some of them He favors more than others, and some He actually curses. So, that's another story, tale altogether. Now, we better move into that other competing idea. So we have this idea that the biblical idea, an idea that works in the real world. It works pretty well, just like Steve and Bonnie get along in their household because they have a close genetic connection that's really, really close and tight. And in terms of Julie and I, we're really tight in our genetic connection. We're another family. We get along better, and when you start jumbling the families all together, you need a little of room, right? Right, so this makes sense. It works pretty well in a fallen world. There's that other idea out there of what a nation ought to be. And that's the idea to pay no attention to the genetic stuff. Forget all this kinship stuff. Who cares about any of that? Let's get everybody together. And if you agree on a certain idea, a certain set of ideas, we can create a propositional nation. All right, well, that is not a new idea either. And it turns out, if you go to Genesis chapter 11, we get probably what appears to be, in my view, what may be the very first propositional nation. Now, we won't have time to read all of Genesis chapter 11. In fact, I don't think I'll read hardly any of it. But you know the story. This is the story of the Tower of Babel. And in it, we're introduced to a particular fellow. There's a guy mentioned, I believe, in Genesis chapter 11. Let's see if we can find him. Oh, let's see. Where is that? Well, it is... it says in verse number 2, in the land of Shinar, and it goes on there. And then verse 9, we have the name of it's called Babel. Well, that takes us back, it turns out, to Genesis chapter 10. And we discover that this business about Babel in Genesis 10:10 comes from this fellow named Nimrod. Now, Nimrod, it turns out, was among... Remember, we had the good guys, the bad guys, and the in-between guys? Well, near as I can tell, it looks like Nimrod came out of the bad guys. He's out of that group called the Hamites. And these people of Ham mess up constantly. Well, it turns out Nimrod, he appears to have come up with this idea of what you might call a propositional empire. And the propositional nation or empire that he built was, he said, let's get everybody together. We want to make one big, gigantic, happy family. And I'll be the big boss. And I'll tell everybody what to think and what to believe. And one of the prime things I want to do is build this tower and make the top go way up to heaven so we can accomplish anything we want. The sky is literally the limit. We're going to have a great big empire. Great big happy family. Well, it wasn't, and in terms of family, I guess I don't know how much he was concerned with family, but it was all under his one big umbrella. So, it doesn't say anything about propositional empire in that chapter, but if you read and you think and you study, you can kind of see it. And I believe a lot of you might agree that this concept is there. Now we know the end of the story. God comes along and says, I don't like that idea. It's just going to create more trouble. I just had to destroy the whole earth with a humongous flood. And here you are creating all kinds of trouble again. I don't want to have to destroy the earth again. So he says, I'm going to mess up your whole plan. I'm going to, in some miraculous way, fix it so now you can't even talk to each other. That'll force you to spread out and live in separate areas. And now, it's being spread out, you can't talk to each other very well, all kinds of trouble in communication. That'll keep things more the way it ought to be. And the world will be a little less of a mess than if I let you do what you want, Nimrod. So, God saves the day. God takes notice of this arrangement. He proclaims this is going to cause evil to go unrestrained. In fact, it actually says that, I believe. Let's see. Let's see here. Verse 6. The Lord said, Behold, the people is one. They have all one language in this they begin to do, and now nothing will be restrained from them which they have imagined to do. So God thinks that's a terrible idea, so he says no. All right. Let's continue. Down through history, there have been other folks who come along and say, I like the idea of a propositional nation. In fact, we're just going to forget about any kinship that you might need to have within a nation, and we'll just kind of start pooling people together. We'll dump them all together, and we'll get our borders bigger and bigger and bigger, and pretty soon you have what becomes known as an empire. Now, this appeals greatly to men of talent, doesn't it? And talent and organization. This is really a strong appeal. It's a strong appeal, and it's an intellectual appeal, because you just think how, if we could just organize better, if we could just communicate better, if we could just unify our currencies, and get rid of these borders, and think of what a glorious, happy world we can have. So lots of people have tried this through world history, and we'll touch base on a couple of them later on. Usually doesn't work out that well. And they put it all together, and you get this large, unwieldy thing. Works for 75 years, 100, 150, and then the whole thing cracks up, and you got a gigantic mess again.